She doesn't belong up here, my brother said, loud enough for the entire ballroom to hear. She never built anything real anyway. My name is Elena. I'm 31 years old, and in my family, I've always had a label attached to me. The invisible one. The failed daughter. The one who never quite launched. At holidays, at weddings, at charity dinners like this one, my presence was tolerated the way an extra chair is tolerated, useful only if someone unexpected shows up. I didn't follow the approved path. My brother went into finance, learned how to speak in numbers that impress strangers. My youngest sister, Nina, followed close behind him in spirit if not in profession. She learned how to perform success, how to say the right things, how to make our mother proud without ever raising her voice. I went somewhere else. I run a small online restoration studio. Ceramics, porcelain, antique lamps, things that arrive broken, cracked, written off. I started it in a rented workshop behind an old house, the kind of place with uneven floors and a door that sticks in winter. I work alone, quietly. I repair objects most people would throw away because fixing them takes time, not confidence. My family calls it a hobby, a phase, something delicate and impractical. At dinners, my work is reduced to jokes. "Still gluing broken cups?" my brother once asked, smiling as if that smile softened the insult. The room laughed gently. No one corrected him. Nina never needed to say anything. She didn't have to. She was the pride, the future, the proof that my mother's expectations had not been misplaced. When my mother talked about plans, she looked at Nina. When she talked about disappointments, she didn't need to look at me at all. The distance between us wasn't explosive. There were no shouting matches, no slammed doors, just small exclusions. Conversations that resumed when I stepped away. Decisions announced after they were finalized. Invitations that arrived late, if at all. Here's the thing they don't know. While they were busy polishing appearances, I was building something else. Slowly, methodically, paper by paper, contract by contract. Learning how value really works, how ownership moves, how silence, when paired with preparation, becomes leverage. Stay with me until the end, and I'll tell you how the family that called me invisible never noticed I was quietly securing my freedom, while they were still admiring their reflections. I arrived early, as usual. That was my role, useful before the room filled, invisible once it did. My parents' house sat at the edge of the suburb, freshly repainted every few years, unchanged in every way that mattered. I carried a small box tied with linen twine. Inside was a restored set of hand-glazed ceramic cups, mid-century, hairline cracks sealed with gold lacquer. Not flashy, precise, quiet work. My mother opened the door, glanced at the box, then at me. "Oh," she said. "You didn't have to bring anything." I handed it to her anyway. She lifted the lid, paused, then closed it again. "We're not really into old things anymore," she said, already turning away. "They don't fit the house." She placed the box on a side table near the coats. It stayed there all night. Dinner hadn't officially started when Nina arrived. She never arrived early. She made entrances. Her heels clicked once, twice, then stopped. Perfect timing. She was glowing in the way people glow when they know they're being watched. "This is Adrian," she said, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Adrian smiled easily. Firm handshake, direct eye contact. He wore confidence the way some men wear tailored jackets, comfortably, without checking the mirror. Nina introduced him as a business consultant. She said it the way my brother said portfolio manager. Slow, deliberate, meant to land. It did. Within minutes, my father was refilling Adrian's glass. My mother leaned in when he spoke. Daniel talked about markets, restructuring, helping companies find efficiency. He didn't say much of substance. He didn't have to. He spoke fluently in reassurance. The table rearranged itself around him. Questions flowed. Opinions were invited. My brother nodded along, measuring him. Nina watched with satisfaction. I listened, quietly cataloging tone and timing. The way Adrian answered before questions fully formed. The way my parents absorbed every word as if it were instruction. At one point, Adrian asked what everyone did. My brother went first. Numbers, growth, acquisitions. Nina followed. Strategy, vision, people, work. Then it was my turn. I run a restoration studio, I said. Mostly ceramics. I've been working on a project for a documentary film. Period pieces. Historically accurate. The room went still. Not dramatic, not hostile, just paused, like a sound system briefly cutting out. My mother took a sip of water. My father looked down at his plate. My brother smiled politely, already disengaging. Nina glanced at Adrian, then away. "Oh," my mother said after a moment. "That's nice." And just like that, the conversation resumed. Around me, not with me. Adrian launched into another story. Something about a turnaround. Everyone leaned back in. I didn't interrupt. I didn't push. I watched. I watched who was heard and who was humored. I watched how attention moved like currency, how easily it transferred to the loudest claim of legitimacy. I felt the familiar distance settle in. Not pain exactly, more like confirmation. I wasn't angry. I was taking notes. Adrian turned to me halfway through the main course. It wasn't deliberate curiosity. It was filler, something to keep the conversation moving. "So, Elena," he said, smiling in a way that suggested politeness, not interest. "What are you working on these days?" I opened my mouth. My mother closed the space for me. "Oh, don't get her started," she said quickly, waving a hand as if brushing away smoke. "She'll go on forever about clay, cracks, kilns." She laughed before finishing the sentence, signaling the others to follow. Marcus didn't miss the cue. "Yeah," he added, leaning back in his chair. "She fixes broken pots from the 19th century. Real cutting-edge stuff." Nina smiled, tight and controlled. "Maybe introduce it differently," she said to me, gently, as if offering advice. "People don't always know how to react. It can make things heavy." The table laughed. Not loudly, not cruelly. The kind of laughter people use when they want to believe they're harmless. Glasses clinked. Forks resumed movement. The moment was declared a joke and buried under noise. I didn't laugh. I didn't speak. Under the table, my hands tightened. Not in anger. In calibration. The way you grip something fragile when you finally understand its weight. Daniel looked briefly uncomfortable, then relieved when the laughter resolved the tension for him. He nodded along, already filing me under eccentric sibling. He didn't know any better. That wasn't his failure. The others did. Marcus avoided my eyes. He had always been good at delivering damage indirectly. Nina took a sip of wine, her gaze fixed on the tablecloth, as if the situation had simply unfolded without authorship. My mother reached for the breadbasket, satisfied the disruption had been neutralized. No one corrected anything. No one said, "That's not accurate." No one said, "She's good at what she does." No one said my name. That was the moment something settled. I had spent years assuming invisibility was a misunderstanding, a temporary misalignment, something that could be corrected with better timing or clearer explanations. That night, I understood it was structural. They weren't confused about me. They were invested in me being small. I watched the room with new clarity. The seating arrangement. Who poured whose wine? Who spoke uninterrupted? Who was allowed complexity? Attention moved predictably, like money in a closed system. It never reached me because it was never meant to. I cataloged the details the way I always did: tone, timing, witnesses. I noted who laughed first, who laughed last, who didn't laugh but didn't object. Paper insurance isn't dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It accumulates quietly: documents, emails, financial patterns, inconsistencies. Proof doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives in layers, waiting for the right moment to be unfolded. That night, I realized something else. They thought the cost of humiliating me was zero. They thought the joke ended at the table. They were wrong. When the laughter faded, conversation shifted back to Adrian. He resumed talking about restructuring, about helping companies clean things up. My mother nodded, impressed by words she didn't need to understand. I excused myself to the kitchen. No one noticed. I stood by the sink, listening to voices filter through the doorway. The sound of comfort, of certainty, of people who believed nothing in their environment could change abruptly. I dried my hands slowly. This would be the last time they laughed like that without consequence. Not because I would confront them, not because I would demand recognition, because I had already stopped needing either. Some breaks don't happen in public. They happen quietly, when you finally understand who is sitting across from you and what the board really looks like. I drove home alone. No music, no calls, just the road sliding under the headlights and the steady sound of the engine holding its line. The neighborhood thinned out quickly. Streetlights became intermittent. The night opened up the way it does when there's finally nothing left to perform for. I replayed the dinner without emotion. Not the words themselves, those were predictable, but the language wrapped around them. Dreamy, impractical, not realistic. They'd been using those terms for years. Soft words, dismissive words, the kind people choose when they want to diminish without sounding cruel. I understood something then that I hadn't allowed myself to name before. Being underestimated wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a role. My family needed me in that role. The invisible one. The unfinished one. The contrast that made their version of success look sharper by comparison. My presence wasn't about who I was. It was about what they needed me to be. And I had been cooperating. Not loudly, not consciously, but by continuing to hope, by showing up with explanations, by bringing gifts that required patience to appreciate, by waiting for a moment that would never come. That night, I stopped waiting. The realization didn't feel dramatic. There was no surge of anger, no bow, just a clean internal click, like a switch flipped with certainty. I decided, without ceremony, that I would no longer seek understanding from people who benefited from not giving it. The relief was immediate. It felt physical. My shoulders dropped. My breathing slowed. The pressure I hadn't realized I was carrying, years of it, released all at once. Not because anything had changed externally, but because I had stopped asking the wrong people the wrong questions. I didn't cut them off. I didn't confront them. I simply withdrew my expectations. That was the beginning of my freedom. Work followed naturally. Within weeks, I accepted a commission from a boutique hotel restoring period ceramics for their main dining room. Then another, from a private collector rebuilding a damaged Art Deco lighting series. The jobs paid well. They required discretion, precision, trust. I gave them all three. I didn't mention any of it to my family, not because I was hiding, but because they no longer had access. Information is a kind of currency. I stopped spending it where there was no return. At night, I organized files, contracts, provenance records, restoration logs, emails, agreements, paper insurance, quiet proof of value, ownership, and authorship. A habit I'd built without fully understanding why, now suddenly obvious. Looking back, the pattern had always been there. I was left out of decisions until the last minute, invited after plans were set, consulted when labor was needed, not when credit was assigned. I saw it clearly now, not as a grievance, but as data. Families like mine don't exile people loudly. They do it politely. They smile. They joke. They make it seem mutual. But the circle stays closed, and you learn you're on the outside because you're always walking to catch up. I stopped walking. That decision, small, internal, unannounced, changed everything. I didn't need to prove anything. I didn't need to be seen. I had my work, my records, my silence. And for the first time, silence wasn't absence. It was control. Nina texted me 3 weeks later. Adrian is proposing. You should be there. No greeting, no context, just an expectation dressed as an invitation. I didn't hesitate. I didn't ask questions. I replied with a single word. Okay. Avoidance would have looked like weakness. Attendance, on my terms, was something else. The engagement ceremony was held at a private venue outside the city. Glass walls, white florals, rented elegance. The kind of place designed to photograph well from every angle. I arrived on time. Not early, not late. I dressed carefully. Neutral colors, clean lines, nothing that asked for attention. Nothing that apologized for being there. I wasn't dressing for them. I was dressing for alignment, so my body wouldn't distract my mind. The room was already full. Familiar faces, familiar hierarchies. My mother spotted me from across the space and smiled with visible relief, as if my presence confirmed something about the family's image. Marcus nodded once. Nina didn't look at me at all. Adrian stood at the center, comfortable in the attention. He had practiced this. I could tell. His posture was relaxed, his voice calibrated for sincerity. When he dropped to one knee, the timing was exact. Applause broke instantly. My mother cried openly, hands pressed to her chest. Cameras lifted. Nina gasped the way people gasp when they know they're being watched. She said yes, of course. There were cheers, toasts, embraces. I clapped when appropriate. I smiled when addressed. I remained still enough to be overlooked, which suited me fine. Later, as the room settled into conversation, Adrian found his way near me. He was flushed with success, relaxed, proud. You know, he said casually, loud enough for Nina to hear. Elena actually restored some ceramics for a small exhibition space I worked with last year. It wasn't praise, just a remark. But it carried weight because it came from him. Mina reacted immediately. Oh, that? She said, laughing lightly. That was tiny. More of a side thing, hardly an exhibition. My mother didn't pause. Yes, she added quickly. Just a small project. More practice than anything serious. The words landed exactly as intended. Adrian nodded, reassured. The moment passed. Attention shifted back to him. Nina relaxed again. I said nothing. Inside, I noted the precision, the speed, the instinctive need to reduce. They didn't even need to think about it. My accomplishments triggered a reflex: minimize, reframe, neutralize. It wasn't personal. It was maintenance. I watched them operate with the same calm I used at work when restoring a fractured piece. Identify the stress point. Observe how pressure is distributed. Understand where the brake will travel next. They had done this my entire life. When I learned independently, it was luck. When I earned well, it was temporary. When others valued my work, it was niche. No achievement escaped reduction. I understood then that patience wasn't passive. It was active restraint. I wasn't waiting for them to change. I was waiting for timing. Paper insurance takes time. People reveal patterns long before they reveal crimes. Financial shortcuts, misrepresentations, documents signed with confidence instead of care. I had been watching quietly, not just as family, but as someone trained to see fractures before collapse. That night, standing in a room full of celebration, I felt none of the old urge to correct the record. Correction implies appeal. I wasn't appealing anymore. As the evening wound down, I slipped out unnoticed. The applause was still echoing inside when I reached my car. I sat for a moment before starting the engine. Not to reflect, to confirm. They would never stop diminishing me, which meant I would never need to announce myself. Patience isn't weakness. It's distance measured carefully. And distance, when paired with preparation, becomes leverage. I stood up without raising my voice. That was what startled them, not the words, but the absence of emotion behind them. Chairs were still, glasses paused midair. The room expected a joke or an apology. It got neither. The ceramic collection I restored last year, I said evenly, looking past my mother to the long table of guests, was from the late 19th century. 14 pieces, documented provenance. The museum valued the completed restoration at just over $800,000. No one laughed. I continued, not because I needed to convince them, but because clarity has its own momentum. That project led to a contract I signed last month, I added. A luxury hotel group, multiple properties, period-accurate ceramic interiors, ongoing work. I didn't name the chain. I didn't need to. The numbers were already doing the work. My mother recovered first. She always did. "Elena," she said sharply, rising halfway from her chair. "This isn't the time. Let's not make this about—" I looked at her directly. "It's already about this," I said. "You just preferred when it wasn't spoken." A ripple moved through the room. Nina's smile had disappeared. Adrian shifted, uncertain. Marcus stared down at his plate, suddenly invested in the pattern of the china. I turned to Nina. "Why?" I asked calmly. "Does my name always come with a disclaimer?" She blinked. "What?" "Every time someone mentions my work," I said, "you reduce it. You soften it. You add a joke. Why?" My mother cut in. "Elena, stop. You're being inappropriate." I didn't look at her. "Nina," I repeated, "why does my existence need to be managed?" For a second, she looked genuinely confused, then defensive. "I don't know what you're talking about. You're overreacting." "No," I said. "I'm finishing." The word landed heavier than I expected. "I've spent years being quiet so this family could stay comfortable," I continued. "I let jokes pass. I let omissions stand. I let you all pretend I was unfinished so you wouldn't have to adjust your picture of yourselves." I paused. Let the silence settle. "I'm done playing that role." My mother stood fully now. "If you keep this up," she said tightly, "you will not be welcome at the wedding." There it was, the final lever. Compliance or exile? I nodded once. "That's fine." Nina's face tightened. "You're embarrassing us," she said. "You don't get to stand there and judge." "I'm not judging," I said. "I'm describing." I turned back to the table. "Nina," I said, "you didn't earn your position here. You inherited it. You stood on favoritism and mistook it for height." Her mouth opened. No sound came out. "I don't hate you," I added. "I just won't shrink for you anymore." The room was completely still now. No phones, no murmurs. The illusion had cracked, and no one knew how to reseal it. I picked up my coat. My mother said something about respect, about gratitude, about family. I didn't respond. At the door, I stopped, not to look back, but to make one thing clear. This is the last event I attend where my silence is required, I said. Consider this notice. Then I left. Outside, the night air was cool and clean. The building behind me glowed with borrowed elegance. Inside, they were still deciding what had just happened. I walked to my car without urgency. Self-respect doesn't announce itself loudly. It stands once and never sits back down again. After the confrontation, everything went silent. Not the dramatic kind. No crying, no rage, just a flat, weightless emptiness that settled in my chest and stayed there. I moved through days mechanically. Drove, ate, slept, worked with my hands while my mind stayed somewhere behind me, watching. What lingered wasn't what Nina said, or Marcus. It was my mother's face when she threatened to erase me from the future, so easily. As if my absence would require no adjustment. As if I were a removable part. That realization cut deeper than the insults ever had. I wasn't the rebel child. I wasn't the disappointment. I was replaceable. I didn't call anyone. I didn't explain myself online. I stopped checking messages I already knew wouldn't come. The silence wasn't punishment. It was diagnostic. I needed to see what remained when approval was removed. For a while, not much did. Then the phone rang. I almost let it go to voicemail. The number was unfamiliar. Area code from New Mexico. Elena? A woman asked when I answered. Her voice was steady, older, certain. This is Margot. I recognized the name immediately. Margot Alvarez, Santa Fe. One of the most respected ceramic conservators in the field. Someone whose work I'd studied quietly for years. I saw the restoration you did on the Caldwell collection, she said. The way you stabilize the fracture lines without erasing their history. That takes restraint. Most people don't have it. I leaned against the work table without realizing it. She didn't praise loudly. She didn't flatter. She spoke the way professionals do when they're naming something precise. There's depth in your work, she continued. You don't just repair objects. You listen to them. No one in my family had ever spoken to me that way. That sentence, simple, accurate, flipped something back on. Not confidence, alignment. We talked for an hour about materials, about ethics, about when not to restore, when to leave evidence of damage intact because erasure is a kind of lie. Before hanging up, she offered to refer me to several clients, serious ones, institutions, designers who valued discretion over spectacle. I thanked her, calmly. After the call ended, I stood in the workshop and let the silence settle again. This time, it felt different. I worked harder, not frantically, but with clarity. The numbness lifted slowly, replaced by focus. Projects arrived through Margot's network, high-value commissions, long timelines, clients who asked thoughtful questions and listened to the answers. I said yes selectively. I raised my prices without apology. At night, I documented everything. Processes, contracts, transfers of ownership. Paper insurance expanded, not as defense now, but as architecture. A structure I controlled. I began sharing parts of the work online. Not my story, just the objects. Before and after. Close-ups of fractures sealed cleanly. Lamps lit again after decades of darkness. The response was immediate. Designers commented, architects shared, collectors reached out. People who understood patience recognized it in others. The support wasn't loud, but it was real, sustained, voluntary. No one asked about my family. That was the point. Looking back, I understood something with uncomfortable clarity. I had been loyal to people who confused proximity with authority. I had mistaken familiarity for insight. It wasn't cruelty that kept me small. It was habit. Margot didn't know my history. She didn't need to. She evaluated the work and decided it mattered. That was enough. The quiet period ended not with reconciliation, but with momentum. I didn't feel healed. I felt occupied by purpose, by competence, by the steady accumulation of something solid. I didn't need to be seen anymore. I had witnesses now. The wedding invitation arrived in a thick, textured envelope. Heavy paper, embossed lettering. Nina's name centered, confident. Adrian's beneath it, slightly smaller. There was no note inside. No acknowledgement of what had been said. No attempt at repair. Just logistics. Date, location, dress code. Attendance was assumed again. I set the invitation aside without opening the RSVP card. 2 days later, my phone rang. "Elena?" a woman asked. Her voice was brisk, practiced. "This is Helena Cross. I'm producing a documentary series on master artisans. Your name came up repeatedly." I didn't respond right away. I waited. Let her continue. "We're filming a segment on restoration work in high-profile environments," she said. "Weddings, museums, heritage spaces, places where aesthetics are symbolic. We'd like to feature your work." She explained the format: close observation, minimal narration, the object as witness. My role would be to restore and install several ceramic pieces for a featured scene: centerpieces, architectural accents, lighting elements. "Where's the shoot?" I asked. She named the venue. I recognized it immediately. The same glass-walled estate, the same manicured grounds. Nina's wedding. For the first time in months, I felt something sharp, not anger, not satisfaction. Precision. Helena paused. "Is that a problem?" "No," I said. "It's appropriate." I agreed to participate that afternoon. I didn't tell my family. Not because I was hiding, but because the story wasn't theirs to manage. This wasn't retaliation. It was alignment. Value meeting visibility without intervention. If they wanted spectacle, they'd get context instead. Preparation took weeks. I selected pieces deliberately. 19th century ceramic forms reinterpreted through restoration, visible fracture lines sealed cleanly, not erased. Gold lacquer where damage had occurred. Lamps whose light emphasized history rather than hiding it. Objects that rewarded attention. I worked slowly, methodically. Every piece documented, every provenance verified. Paper insurance updated, not as defense now, but as authorship. Helena's crew arrived early on the day of installation. Cameras stayed distant. No drama. They filmed hands, surfaces, process. The work spoke without commentary. Guests arrived later. I wasn't announced. I wasn't introduced. I moved through the space the way I always did, precisely enough to be invisible to those not trained to look. Nina didn't see me at first. She was busy performing happiness, greeting guests, posing, accepting compliments on the decor. "Stunning," people said. "So thoughtful." She smiled, taking credit for choices she didn't understand. Adrian noticed before she did. He recognized the pieces. He froze for half a second, just enough. "Elena?" he said quietly, approaching. "What are you—" "Working," I replied. He glanced toward the cameras, toward Helena, observing from a distance. Something clicked behind his eyes. Not guilt, calculation. My mother arrived moments later. She stopped short when she saw me. Her expression shifted quickly, surprise smoothed into composure. She opened her mouth, then closed it. No apology came. None was needed. Guests began asking questions, not about the couple, about the work. Who restored it? Where it came from? Helena answered when appropriate. Sometimes I did, calmly, factually, without emphasis. The cameras caught everything. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't explain myself. I let proximity do what arguments never could. This wasn't revenge. Revenge requires intent to wound. This was placement. I had placed my work in a room that had spent years minimizing me. I had allowed value to exist without permission. The contrast did the rest. When the ceremony began, I stepped back, out of frame, out of view. The pieces remained, holding light, reflecting movement, carrying history forward. I left before the vows. In the car, I didn't feel triumph. I felt closure. Value doesn't argue. It appears and rearranges the room. The preparation took weeks, not rushed weeks, measured ones. I worked the way I always did when something mattered. Early mornings, late stops, long pauses between decisions. The central pieces came first. Ceremonial vessels, low pedestals, a display table finished in antique glaze that absorbed light instead of reflecting it. The largest piece was the last. An early 20th century vessel recovered in fragments. Dozens of them. The kind of break that usually ends in disposal. I laid the shards out on linen, studied the edges, the history written into each fault line. Reassembly took days. Restoration took longer. I sealed the fractures cleanly, left them visible, traced with gold where the damage had altered the story. When it was finished, the vessel didn't look new. It looked honest. Helena visited the studio once during that period. She didn't interrupt. She watched, took notes, filmed hands, not faces. When she finally spoke, it was only to say, "We want to interview you on site." "At the wedding?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "Context matters." I agreed. The installation happened the day before the ceremony. I arrived before sunrise, truck loaded, crew minimal. We moved quietly through the space. Glass walls still dark, chairs stacked, floors empty. The pieces went exactly where they needed to be. Center lines, sight lines, places where people would pause without knowing why. No labels, no signatures. By noon, the room had changed. The work didn't announce itself. It anchored the space. Guests would feel it before they noticed it. The vessel from the early 20th century sat near the center, low enough to invite inspection, elevated enough to command respect. I stepped back and checked distances, light angles, reflection points, everything aligned. That afternoon, strangers arrived. Planners, stylists, venue staff. They stopped near the pieces, bent closer, asked quiet questions. Where did these come from? Who did this work? Is this original? I listened without answering. Helena's crew captured the exchanges, the curiosity, the reverence. No one asked who I was. That was fine. The interview was filmed in a side room, minimal setup, one chair, natural light. Helena asked direct questions, no drama, no backstory bait. "How do you know when a piece is finished?" she asked. "When it stops asking for attention," I said. "When it can exist on its own terms." She nodded, let the silence sit. I spoke about restoration as stewardship, about not erasing damage just to make others comfortable, about restraint. The camera stayed still. No music, no emphasis. By the time guests arrived the next day, the room was full. Compliments floated past me. I heard them as I adjusted a final placement. "Extraordinary. So intentional. This changes the whole space." Nina passed nearby once. She didn't recognize the work as mine. She smiled, accepting praise for the environment. Adrian lingered longer. He studied the large vessel, eyes narrowing, recognition flickering again. I didn't engage. The interview footage played on a monitor in a side gallery during the reception. Not loud, optional. Those who watched stayed longer than expected. I wasn't announced. I wasn't introduced. I wasn't needed. The work had already entered the room and rearranged its priorities. I left before the first toast. In the car, I didn't feel exposed. I felt placed, correctly, finally. Not inside the family, not outside it either. Somewhere parallel, untouchable. Some people think appearing is the goal. It isn't. Positioning is. The moment arrived quietly, not during the vows, not during the applause. It happened between courses, while people were moving through the space with glasses in hand, half listening to conversation. A screen in the side gallery shifted. The documentary segment began its scheduled preview, national broadcast, prime rotation. My name appeared beneath my image. Elena, featured artisan. The room changed temperature. My mother stopped mid-sentence. Marcus looked up, confused, then read again. Nina stared at the screen as if it had made a mistake. Adrian didn't blink. He already understood what this meant. The camera showed my hands at work. The voiceover was spare, no sentiment, just process, precision, and value. The words heritage, stewardship, nationally recognized, passed through the room like a current. Nina found me near the back, where I'd positioned myself deliberately. "You planned this," she said, low and sharp. "You're stealing attention on my wedding day." I met her eyes, calm, unmoved. "I'm here because my work was invited," I said. "That's all." She scoffed. "You always do this. You make everything about you." I shook my head once. "No, I stopped doing that a long time ago." My mother approached then, flustered, embarrassed. "Elena," she said, forcing warmth, "we should talk later. This isn't appropriate." "I agree," I said. "That's why I won't." The segment ended. Applause rose, uncertain at first, then sincere. Not for the couple, for the work, for something that had earned its place without asking. After the wedding, the broadcast went live. Emails followed within hours. Institutions, hotels, cultural foundations, contracts written in language that didn't apologize for numbers. My calendar filled months ahead. My rates doubled, then stabilized higher. I didn't announce any of it. A week later, my mother called. Her voice was careful, measured. "We've all been thinking," she said. "Maybe we should start fresh. Put everything behind us." I listened. Let the silence stretch. "Start fresh how?" I asked. "Well," she said, "you know, be a family again." I pictured the table, the laughter, the reduction, the ease with which my absence had always been imagined. "No," I said, "I'm not doing that anymore." She sounded hurt. "So you're just done?" "I'm done injuring myself to maintain your comfort," I said. "That's all." I hung up without waiting for permission. Nina sent an invitation weeks later, a housewarming. Polite, neutral, no apology. I declined without explanation. There was nothing left to negotiate. The best part of freedom isn't distance. It's clarity. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt settled. My work spoke where I once had to. My records were complete. My paper insurance, years of it, sat filed, untouched, no longer needed as armor, but kept as proof of authorship. I thought back to the first fracture I ever repaired, how the crack didn't disappear, how it became part of the structure, stronger because it had been acknowledged. Some families never learn that. They prefer the illusion of wholeness. I chose something else. The last image Helena used in the episode wasn't my face. It was the restored vessel, light moving across its surface, fractures visible, sealed, intentional. That was enough. Revenge demands reaction. I chose focus. And focus, sustained long enough, builds a life no one else gets to enter without invitation.